The rain hammered against the cracked asphalt of downtown Seattle with relentless fury, turning the narrow alley between Morrison's bar and the old brick warehouse into a treacherous maze of puddles and shadows. Sarah Martinez pulled her navy blue hoodie tighter around her shoulders as she navigated through the dimly lit passage, her footsteps echoing off the wet walls. At 28 years old, she possessed an athletic build that spoke of countless hours spent in rigorous training, though tonight she looked like any other young woman trying to get home after a long day. The alley had become a shortcut she used regularly during her time stationed at Naval Base Kitsap, just a 40-minute drive from the city. Tonight marked her final evening of shore leave before shipping out for another deployment, and she had spent it quietly celebrating with a few close friends at Morrison's. The bar had been her refuge during the past few months, a place where she could blend in with civilians and temporarily forget about the weight of her classified responsibilities. As Sarah approached the halfway point of the alley, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. 3 figures emerged from behind a large dumpster, their silhouettes menacing against the faint glow of a distant streetlight. The men moved with the confident swagger of predators who had found what they believed to be easy prey. Their leader, a tall man with sleeve tattoos covering his arms, stepped directly into her path while his companions flanked her for both sides. Well, what do we have here?" the leader called out, his voice carrying a mixture of amusement and malice. "A little lost lamb wandering through our neighborhood all alone." His breath formed small clouds in the cold air as he spoke, and Sarah could smell the mixture of alcohol and cigarettes that clung to his clothes. The other 2 men chuckled darkly, clearly enjoying what they saw as a moment of easy entertainment. Sarah's training kicked in immediately, but she maintained her civilian facade. Years of conditioning had taught her to assess threats quickly while appearing unthreatened. Her eyes swept across the 3 men, cataloging their positions, possible weapons, and escape routes. The leader stood about 6 feet tall with a muscular build, likely someone who had spent time in prison based on the quality and style of his tattoos. The man to her left was shorter but stockier, with nervous energy that suggested he might be unpredictable. The third man remained partially hidden in shadows, but she could see he was the largest of the group. "I'm just trying to get to my car," Sarah said calmly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. She had learned long ago that appearing weak or frightened only encouraged bullies and predators. Instead, she projected quiet confidence while internally preparing for multiple scenarios. Her hands remained relaxed at her sides, but every muscle in her body was coiled and ready for action. The leader laughed and took another step closer, now standing less than arm's length away. "Your car? Sweetheart, I think you're confused about how this works. This is our alley, and if you want to pass through, you're going to have to pay the toll." His companions spread out slightly, clearly experienced in cornering victims and cutting off escape routes. They had done this before, probably many times, and their confidence suggested they had rarely encountered resistance. "What kind of toll?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. She was buying time, allowing her training to fully engage while maintaining the appearance of a frightened civilian. Her posture remained non-threatening, but her weight shifted almost imperceptibly onto the balls of her feet. Years of combat training had taught her that the key to survival often lay in allowing opponents to underestimate her capabilities. The stocky man to her left spoke up for the first time, his voice high-pitched and excited. "Maybe she's got some cash in that pretty little purse of hers, Danny. Or maybe she's got something else we might be interested in." His suggestion drew crude laughter from his companions, and Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly. These men had clearly moved beyond simple robbery into territory that required immediate action. Danny, the apparent leader, reached out towards Sarah's shoulder with a meaty hand decorated with poorly done knuckle tattoos. "Why don't we start by seeing what you've got in that bag, sweetheart? Then, maybe we can discuss other arrangements." His tone had shifted from mocking to openly threatening, and Sarah knew the window for de-escalation had closed completely. The moment Danny's hand made contact with her shoulder, Sarah moved with lightning precision. Her left hand shot up and grabbed his wrist while simultaneously stepping to the side and pivoting her hips. The motion was fluid and practiced, executed with the muscle memory of someone who had performed similar maneuvers thousands of times in training and real combat situations. Danny's confident expression instantly changed to one of surprise and pain as Sarah applied pressure to specific nerve points in his wrist. "What the hell?" Danny gasped, trying to pull his hand free, but finding himself completely unable to break Sarah's grip. The pain shooting up his arm was unlike anything he had experienced, precise and overwhelming. His two companions stood frozen for a moment, struggling to process what they were witnessing. The small woman they had cornered was now controlling their leader with apparent ease. Sarah's voice remained calm and measured as she spoke. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away from this situation. All three of you turn around, leave this alley, and find something better to do with your evening. Nobody gets hurt, and we all go home safe." Despite her controlled tone, there was an unmistakable edge of authority in her words that made all three men pause uncertainly. The stocky man recovered first from his initial shock and lunged forward, apparently believing he could catch Sarah off guard while she was occupied with Danny. He had badly miscalculated. Without releasing her grip on Danny's wrist, Sarah pivoted smoothly and drove her right elbow directly into the attacking man's solar plexus. The impact drove all the air from his lungs and sent him staggering backward, gasping and clutching his chest. The largest man, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "Lady, you have no idea who you're messing with. Danny's got connections all over this city. You better let him go right now, or things are going to get real ugly for you." His voice carried the deep rumble of someone accustomed to intimidating others through size and implied violence. Sarah looked directly at the large man, her eyes cold and calculating. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Three men who thought they could corner an innocent woman in an alley and take whatever they wanted from her. What you don't know is who you're dealing with." She applied additional pressure to Danny's wrist, causing him to cry out in pain and drop to one knee. "I'm going to count to 3. If you're not walking away by then, this situation becomes much more complicated for everyone involved." The rain continued to fall steadily, creating a constant backdrop of noise that would muffle any sounds their confrontation might produce. Sarah was acutely aware that while the alley provided some concealment from casual observers, it also meant that no help would be immediately available if the situation escalated beyond her ability to control it. However, her years of training in hostile environments had prepared her for exactly these types of scenarios. "1," Sarah said clearly, her grip on Danny's wrist remaining steady and unforgiving. The man was now breathing heavily, sweat mixing with rainwater on his forehead despite the cold temperature. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by genuine fear and confusion about how the situation had turned against him so quickly. The stocky man had recovered enough to stand upright, but he remained doubled over and gasping. "Danny, what the hell is wrong with this chick? She's like some kind of ninja or something." His voice was strained and filled with bewilderment. Clearly, their previous victims had never fought back with anything approaching Sarah's level of skill and precision. "2," Sarah continued, her voice maintaining the same calm authority. She could see uncertainty creeping into the large man's expression as he watched his leader being completely controlled by someone he had assumed would be helpless. The dynamics of the confrontation had shifted so dramatically that none of the three men seemed to know how to proceed. Danny tried once more to free his wrist, putting all his strength into the effort, but Sarah's grip remained unbreakable. "Please," he gasped, genuine desperation creeping into his voice. "Just let me go. We'll leave. We didn't mean anything by it." The transformation from predator to pleading victim had taken less than 2 minutes, a testament to both Sarah's capabilities and the cowardly nature of men who typically preyed on the defenseless. The large man took a step backward, clearly reconsidering his options. "This isn't over, lady. You have no idea what you started here." His words were intended as a threat, but his retreat undermined any menace they might have carried. He was clearly uncomfortable with a situation that had moved so far outside his experience and understanding. "3," Sarah said, and without any further warning, she executed a perfectly controlled takedown that sent Danny sprawling onto the wet asphalt. The movement was so smooth and effortless that it appeared almost like a dance, except for the very real impact of Danny's body hitting the ground. He lay there for a moment, stunned and trying to process what had just happened to him. Sarah straightened up and looked at the other two men, who were now backing away slowly. "The offer to leave peacefully has expired. Now you have a choice. You can run, and maybe I'll decide not to follow up on this incident. Or you can stay and find out exactly how much worse this situation can get for you." Her tone had shifted slightly, carrying an edge of promise that made both men shiver despite the adrenaline pumping through their systems. The stocky man grabbed the large man's arm. "Come on, Rick. This chick is seriously messed up. Let's get out of here before she calls the cops or something." He was clearly the most frightened of the three, having experienced firsthand the precision and effectiveness of Sarah's combat techniques. Rick hesitated, looking down at Danny, who was slowly trying to get back to his feet while cradling his injured wrist. "We can't just leave Danny here, man. What if she does something else to him?" Despite his words, Rick was also backing away, clearly torn between loyalty to his friend and self-preservation. Sarah addressed Rick directly. "Your friend is going to be fine. His wrist might be sore for a few days, but nothing is broken or permanently damaged. However, if any of you ever approach another woman the way you approach me tonight, the outcome will be very different. Do I make myself clear?" Her words carried the weight of absolute certainty, leaving no doubt about her capabilities or her willingness to use them. Danny finally managed to get to his feet, still clutching his wrist and breathing heavily. "Who are you?" he whispered, staring at Sarah with a mixture of fear and amazement. "How did you do that?" The question seemed to come from genuine curiosity rather than continued aggression, as if he was trying to understand how his evening had gone so wrong so quickly. Sarah looked at all three men one final time. "I'm someone who doesn't appreciate being cornered in alleys by men who think they can take whatever they want from women. Consider this a learning experience and an opportunity to make better choices in the future." She began walking toward the end of the alley, her movements calm and confident. The three men watched her go, none of them making any move to follow or continue the confrontation. Danny was still nursing his injured wrist, while his companions helped support him as they slowly made their way back toward the bar they had emerged from. The entire encounter had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it had fundamentally changed how all four people involved viewed both themselves and the world around them. As Sarah reached the end of the alley and stepped back onto the well-lit main street, she allowed herself a small smile. Her car was parked just around the corner, and within minutes, she would be heading back to base to prepare for her upcoming deployment. The three men would probably spend the rest of the evening trying to make sense of what had happened to them, likely embellishing the story with each telling until it became something resembling an urban legend. However, what none of them realized as they nursed their wounds and wounded pride was that their encounter in the alley was about to attract attention from sources they never could have imagined. The security camera mounted on the corner of the warehouse had captured the entire confrontation, and the footage was automatically uploaded to a central monitoring system that served multiple law enforcement agencies throughout the Seattle metropolitan area. Detective Marcus Thompson had been working the night shift for Seattle Police Department's gang unit for nearly 15 years, and he thought he had seen every type of street confrontation imaginable. When the automated alert pinged on his computer at 11:47 p.m., flagging unusual activity captured by surveillance cameras in the Morrison district, he almost ignored it. The system generated dozens of false alarms each night, usually triggered by stray cats, drunk college students, or homeless individuals seeking shelter. However, something about the timestamp and location made him pause. The Morrison district had experienced a significant uptick in muggings and assaults over the past 6 months, particularly in the narrow alleys that connected the main thoroughfare to the residential neighborhoods beyond. 3 separate victims had reported being cornered by a group of men matching nearly identical descriptions, and Thompson had been specifically monitoring that area for any signs of the perpetrators. He clicked on a video file and watched as the grainy black and white footage began to play. The camera angle wasn't perfect, positioned high on the corner of an old warehouse, and focused primarily on the mouth of the alley rather than its interior. Initially, he could only make out shadowy figures moving within the narrow passage, but as his eyes adjusted to the poor lighting conditions, the scene began to make more sense. Thompson saw a lone female figure walking through the alley, followed by 3 larger shapes that seemed to emerge from concealment near a dumpster. His pulse quickened as he recognized the setup he had been looking for. This appeared to be the same group that had been terrorizing women in the area, finally caught in the act by surveillance equipment. He reached for his radio to dispatch units to the scene, but hesitated as the footage continued to play. What happened next defied everything Thompson thought he knew about typical mugging scenarios. Instead of the victim being overwhelmed by her attackers, the situation seemed to reverse itself almost instantly. The small female figure appeared to take control of the largest male attacker with movements that were too precise and controlled to be accidental or lucky. Even through the poor quality footage, Thompson could see that the woman was demonstrating combat techniques that went far beyond basic self-defense. What the hell? Thompson muttered to himself as he watched the woman systematically neutralize all 3 attackers without appearing to sustain any injury herself. He had seen plenty of self-defense situations during his career, but this was something entirely different. The woman's movements were fluid, professional, and devastatingly effective. She wasn't just defending herself. She was completely dominating the confrontation with what appeared to be military-level combat training. Thompson immediately began running the footage through the department's facial recognition software, though the camera angle and lighting conditions made identification challenging. What concerned him more than the woman's identity was the level of skill she had displayed. In his experience, civilians with that degree of combat proficiency usually fell into one of several categories: current or former military personnel, professional martial artists, or individuals involved in illegal activities that required such skills. The detective made several phone calls to colleagues in different departments, sharing the footage and asking for opinions about what they were seeing. The consensus was unanimous. The woman in the video possessed training that went far beyond anything available to typical civilians. Several of his contacts suggested reaching out to the military police unit stationed at the various bases around Seattle to determine if any active duty personnel had been involved in the incident. Meanwhile, across the city at Naval Base Kitsap, Sarah Martinez was completing her final preparations for deployment. Her small apartment on base was sparse and functional, containing only the essential items she would need during her brief periods of shore leave. Most of her personal belongings were stored in a secure facility, as her assignments often required extended periods away from any permanent residence. Sarah had served with distinction in the Navy SEALs for over 6 years, following a circuitous path that had begun with her enlistment as a conventional sailor and evolved through multiple specialized training programs. Her official record listed her as a communications specialist, a cover story that allowed her to operate in civilian environments without drawing unwanted attention to her actual capabilities and responsibilities. Her real work involved classified operations that took her to dangerous locations around the world, where her combination of technical skills and combat training made her invaluable for missions that required both precision and adaptability. She had participated in hostage rescues in Somalia, intelligence gathering operations in Eastern Europe, and counterterrorism activities throughout the Middle East. Each deployment had added new skills and experiences to her already impressive repertoire. As Sarah packed her gear for the upcoming mission, she reflected on the encounter in the alley. Such incidents were an unfortunate reality of civilian life, and She had long ago accepted that her training would occasionally be required in non-military situations. What troubled her was not the confrontation itself, but the possibility that her actions might have attracted unwanted attention to her real identity and capabilities. The three men she had encountered were clearly local criminals, probably with connections to other illegal activities in the Seattle area. If they decided to report the incident or seek revenge, they might begin asking questions that could compromise her cover identity. Sarah made a mental note to monitor the situation upon her return from deployment, though she hoped the men would simply chalk up their experience to bad luck and move on with their lives. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes. The message was brief and typically cryptic. Package departure confirmed. Transport leaves 0600. Recommend early arrival for final briefing materials. Sarah understood that her mission was proceeding as scheduled and that she should report to the staging area an hour before the official departure time to receive last-minute intelligence updates. What Sarah didn't know was that Detective Thompson had already begun making inquiries with military installations throughout the region. His investigation had started as a routine follow-up to what appeared to be an exceptional self-defense incident, but the more he learned about the level of skill demonstrated in the footage, the more convinced he became that significant resources needed to be dedicated to identifying the woman involved. Thompson's first contact was with the military police unit at Joint Base Lewis McChord, the largest military installation in the area. Captain Jennifer Walsh had been cooperative but ultimately unhelpful, explaining that personnel records were classified and that any investigation involving active-duty military members would need to go through official channels that could take weeks or months to navigate. However, Captain Walsh had been intrigued enough by the footage to share it with her counterparts at other installations, including Naval Base Kitsap. Within hours, the video had circulated among security personnel at multiple facilities, each viewing it through the lens of their own expertise and responsibilities. While none of them could officially identify the woman involved, several experienced officers noted that her techniques bore striking resemblances to advanced military training protocols. The situation became more complicated when the footage reached the desk of Agent Rebecca Foster, a civilian contractor who worked with the Defense Intelligence Agency on matters involving operational security for classified personnel. Foster's job involved monitoring potential security breaches that might compromise active operations or expose the identities of personnel working on sensitive missions. Foster immediately recognized several concerning elements in the surveillance footage. The woman's combat techniques suggested training that was typically only available to special operations personnel. Her ability to remain calm and controlled throughout the confrontation indicated someone with extensive field experience. Most troubling of all, her apparent comfort with violence and her precise application of force suggested someone who had used such skills professionally in high-stakes situations. Agent Foster began her own investigation, using resources and databases that were unavailable to local law enforcement. Her initial queries focused on identifying any special operations personnel who were currently on shore leave in the Seattle area. The list was surprisingly short, as most classified personnel were required to maintain detailed itineraries during their time away from active operations. Within 6 hours of the alley confrontation, Agent Foster had narrowed her search to fewer than a dozen possibilities. Sarah Martinez's name appeared on the list, along with her cover identity and civilian background information. However, Foster's security clearance allowed her to access additional details that painted a very different picture of Sarah's actual capabilities and recent assignments. The more Agent Foster learned about Sarah Martinez, the more concerned she became about the potential security implications of the alley incident. Sarah's real record showed involvement in some of the military's most sensitive operations, including several missions that remained classified at the highest levels. If her identity became known to civilian law enforcement or criminal organizations, it could compromise ongoing operations and put other personnel at risk. Foster immediately contacted Lieutenant Commander Hayes with her concerns. The conversation was brief but urgent, focusing on the need to assess whether Sarah's cover had been compromised and what steps might be necessary to mitigate any potential security breaches. Hayes agreed to delay Sarah's departure until a full security assessment could be completed. Meanwhile, Detective Thompson continued his own investigation, unaware that his routine inquiry had triggered alarms within the military intelligence community. He had managed to enhance several frames of the surveillance footage, improving the image quality enough to potentially support facial recognition analysis. He was also working with the 3 victims of the attempted mugging, trying to gather additional details about the woman who had intervened in their criminal activity. Danny Morrison, the apparent leader of the 3 attackers, had initially been reluctant to cooperate with police. His criminal record included multiple arrests for assault, robbery, and drug-related offenses, and he was naturally suspicious of any law enforcement contact. However, his encounter with Sarah had left him genuinely shaken, and he found himself willing to discuss the incident in hopes of understanding what had happened to him. "She wasn't normal, Detective," Danny explained during his interview at the precinct. "I've been in a lot of fights, and I've seen people who know how to handle themselves. This was different. She moved like she had been doing this stuff her whole life, like it was as natural as breathing." He unconsciously rubbed his wrist, which still showed faint bruising from Sarah's grip. Thompson pressed for more details. "Can you describe her appearance?" "Height, weight, distinguishing features." He was building a profile that he hoped to match against military personnel databases, though he wasn't yet sure how to gain access to such classified information. "She was maybe 5'6", athletic build, dark hair," Danny recalled. "But what I remember most was her eyes. When she looked at us, it was like she was seeing right through us, like she knew exactly what we were thinking and what we were going to do before we did it. And her voice never changed, never got excited or scared. She talked to us like she was giving directions to lost tourists." The interview with Danny's 2 associates provided similar descriptions, along with additional details about Sarah's combat techniques. All 3 men consistently described her movements as professional and precise, unlike anything they had encountered in street fights or even in encounters with police officers. Their descriptions aligned perfectly with Agent Foster's assessment of the surveillance footage. As Thompson continued gathering information, he began to realize that his investigation had stumbled into something much larger than a simple assault case. The woman in the alley possessed skills and training that suggested involvement in activities far beyond civilian law enforcement's typical jurisdiction. He started making discreet inquiries about proper protocols for cases that might involve military personnel or national security matters. However, Thompson's investigation was about to intersect with Agent Foster's security assessment in ways that would complicate both of their objectives. Foster had been monitoring civilian law enforcement communications related to the incident, and she was becoming increasingly concerned about the level of attention the case was receiving. If Detective Thompson continued his investigation much further, he might uncover information that could compromise not just Sarah's identity, but entire operational networks that depended on maintaining strict secrecy. The situation reached a critical point when Thompson submitted a formal request to access military personnel records through official channels. The request triggered automatic notifications within the intelligence community, alerting multiple agencies to the fact that civilian law enforcement was actively investigating what appeared to be a classified military asset. Agent Foster realized that immediate action was necessary to prevent a potential security catastrophe. She began coordinating with Lieutenant Commander Hayes and other relevant authorities to develop a strategy that would satisfy civilian law enforcement requirements while protecting operational security. The solution would need to be carefully crafted to avoid raising additional suspicions while ensuring that Sarah's real identity remained protected. Sarah herself remained unaware of the investigation swirling around her until Lieutenant Commander Hayes summoned her for an emergency briefing at 0400 hours, 2 hours before her scheduled departure time. When she arrived at the secure briefing facility, she found Hayes waiting with Agent Foster and two other individuals she didn't recognize, but whose bearing clearly identified them as senior intelligence personnel. Petty Officer Martinez, Hayes began formally. We need to discuss the incident that occurred in downtown Seattle approximately 8 hours ago. It appears that your actions, while commendable from a personal safety perspective, may have created some complications that require immediate attention. Sarah's heart sank as she realized that her encounter in the alley had indeed attracted the kind of attention she had hoped to avoid. The secure briefing room felt unusually cold as Sarah Martinez sat across from the assembled intelligence officials, each face reflecting the gravity of her situation. Agent Foster opened a classified file and spread several photographs across the metal table, including enhanced stills from the surveillance footage and detailed analysis reports that had been compiled overnight by various agencies. The incident in the alley has generated significant interest from multiple law enforcement agencies, Agent Foster explained, her tone professional but concerned. Detective Thompson from Seattle PD has launched a formal investigation, and his inquiries are beginning to approach classified territory. We have approximately 6 hours before his investigation reaches a point where we can no longer contain it through normal channels. Lieutenant Commander Hayes leaned forward, addressing Sarah directly. Your deployment has been postponed indefinitely pending resolution of this security matter. We need to assess whether your cover identity has been compromised and determine what steps are necessary to protect ongoing operations that depend on your classified status. Sarah felt a mixture of frustration and resignation. She had known that her encounter with the three attackers might have consequences, but she had hoped that the incident would remain a minor local matter that would fade from attention within a few days. The presence of senior intelligence personnel indicated that the situation had escalated far beyond her expectations. What exactly does Detective Thompson know? Sarah asked, trying to gauge the extent of the security breach. Her years of experience in classified operations had taught her the importance of understanding the full scope of any compromise before developing countermeasures. One of the unnamed intelligence officials, a stern-faced man in his 50s, consulted his notes before responding. Thompson has surveillance footage that clearly shows your combat capabilities. He has interviewed the 3 perpetrators, all of whom have provided detailed descriptions of your techniques and demeanor. Most concerning, he has submitted formal requests to access military personnel records and has been making inquiries about proper protocols for investigating cases involving potential military personnel. Agent Foster added, "We've been monitoring Thompson's communications and activities. He's a competent investigator with 15 years of experience, and he recognizes that what he witnessed in that alley was not typical civilian self-defense. He's going to continue pursuing this until he gets answers, which means we need to provide him with an explanation that satisfies his curiosity without compromising operational security." Sarah understood the implications immediately. The intelligence community would need to craft a cover story that explained her capabilities while protecting her real identity and mission history. Such deceptions were common in her line of work, but they required careful coordination and often involved creating extensive false documentation to support the fictional narrative. What options do we have? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. In situations like this, there were typically only a few viable approaches: complete denial and misdirection, partial disclosure with a fabricated background, or full revelation followed by recruitment or elimination of the security threat. Lieutenant Commander Hayes exchanged glances with the other officials before responding. We've developed several potential scenarios. The first involves creating a false identity that credits your skills to civilian training in martial arts and self-defense. We would provide documentation showing extensive training in multiple disciplines, along with fabricated employment records that would explain your physical conditioning and tactical awareness. The unnamed intelligence official continued the explanation. The second option involves partial disclosure. We would reveal that you're military personnel, but We would provide false records indicating conventional training rather than special operations background. This approach carries higher risk, but might be more believable given the level of skill you demonstrated. Agent Foster presented the third option with obvious reluctance. The final possibility is bringing Detective Thompson into the classified environment. We would brief him on the general nature of your work and request his cooperation in maintaining operational security. This approach has been used successfully in other cases, but it requires extensive background investigation and creates ongoing security obligations. Sarah considered each option carefully, weighing the potential consequences and long-term implications. Her primary concern was protecting the operational security of her teammates and ongoing missions, but she also recognized that her own career and future assignments will be significantly impacted by whatever decision was made. How much time do we have to implement whichever option we choose? Sarah asked. She was already thinking through the practical challenges of creating and maintaining a convincing cover story under active investigation by an experienced detective. Thompson is scheduled to receive responses to his official inquiries within the next 12 hours, Agent Foster replied. If we're going to intercept those responses and substitute our own information, we need to act immediately. Once he receives actual military records or official denials, our options become much more limited. Meanwhile, Detective Thompson was experiencing his own frustrations with the pace of his investigation. His requests for information had disappeared into bureaucratic channels that seemed designed to slow down rather than facilitate his inquiry. Phone calls went unreturned. Emails received automated responses promising follow-up that never came, and official channels provided only vague references to proper procedures without actual assistance. Thompson's years of experience had taught him to recognize when his investigation was being deliberately obstructed. The pattern of responses he was receiving suggested that someone with significant authority was actively working to prevent him from accessing information related to the woman in the alley. Rather than discouraging his investigation, this obstruction only increased his determination to uncover the truth. The detective decided to pursue alternative approaches that might bypass official channels. He reached out to contacts in federal law enforcement agencies, hoping that someone might have access to databases or information sources that were unavailable to local police. He also began researching the legal frameworks that govern interactions between civilian law enforcement and military personnel, looking for precedents that might guide his investigation. Thompson's inquiry reached the desk of FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, who specialized in cases involving potential terrorist activities and threats to national security. Santos had worked closely with military intelligence agencies throughout her career and immediately recognized the sensitive nature of Thompson's request. She contacted Agent Foster directly to coordinate a response that would satisfy Thompson's legitimate law enforcement needs while protecting classified information. The conversation between Santos and Foster resulted in a decision to implement the second option: partial disclosure with fabricated military records. They would acknowledge that the woman in the alley was indeed military personnel, but they would provide false documentation indicating conventional rather than special operations background. This approach would explain her combat skills while protecting the most sensitive aspects of her real work. Agent Foster spent the next several hours working with specialized personnel who created false military records for Sarah Martinez. The fabricated documents showed service as a military police officer with additional training in hand-to-hand combat and defensive tactics. Her deployment history was altered to show conventional assignments rather than special operations missions, and her security clearance level was significantly downgraded to match her fictional background. The false records were sophisticated and comprehensive, including training certificates, performance evaluations, and assignment histories that would withstand casual inspection. However, they were also designed with subtle inconsistencies that would alert intelligence personnel to their fictional nature if more detailed investigation became necessary in the future. Sarah was briefed on her new fictional background and provided with supporting documentation that she would need to memorize completely. The cover story explained her presence in Seattle as ordinary shore leave, and her combat skills as the result of specialized military police training combined with personal interest in martial arts. She was instructed to remain available for potential questioning while maintaining her civilian facade. Lieutenant Commander Hayes emphasized the importance of consistency in maintaining the false narrative. Remember that Detective Thompson is an experienced investigator who will be looking for inconsistencies or contradictions in your story. Every detail needs to align with the documentation we've provided, and you need to be prepared for detailed questions about your training and experience. Agent Foster added a warning about the long-term implications of the deception. This false identity will become part of your permanent cover documentation, which means you'll need to maintain consistency with it throughout the remainder of your career. Any future incidents or situations that draw attention to your capabilities will need to align with this fictional background. Sarah understood that she was essentially being given a new professional identity that would limit her operational flexibility in the future. The fabricated background would constrain how she could respond to situations and what explanations would be available if her skills were again displayed publicly. However, she also recognized that protecting ongoing operations and the safety of her teammates required personal sacrifices. The implementation of the false identity proceeded smoothly, with FBI Special Agent Santos serving as the liaison between the intelligence community and Detective Thompson. Santos contacted Thompson directly and explained that his inquiry had reached federal attention due to potential national security implications, but that cooperation was possible within appropriate limitations. Thompson was invited to attend a briefing at the Seattle FBI field office, where he would receive information about the woman he was investigating along with explanations about why certain details needed to remain classified. The detective was both relieved and apprehensive about finally receiving official cooperation, though he suspected that the information he would receive would be carefully limited. The briefing was scheduled for late afternoon, giving Agent Foster and her colleagues time to complete their preparations and ensure that all supporting documentation was properly integrated into official databases. Sarah was positioned at a secure facility where she could be reached immediately if Thompson's questions required real-time coordination with her handlers. As the appointed time approached, Detective Thompson arrived at the FBI field office with a mixture of anticipation and skepticism. His years of experience had taught him that federal agencies rarely provided complete information to local law enforcement, and he expected to receive only partial answers to his questions. However, he was grateful for any official cooperation after days of bureaucratic stonewalling. Special Agent Santos greeted Thompson personally and escorted him to a secure conference room where several other federal officials were waiting. The presence of multiple agencies indicated the significance of the matter and suggested that the woman in the alley was indeed connected to sensitive government activities. Detective Thompson, Santos began, we appreciate your patience with this investigation, and we're prepared to provide you with information that will help resolve your case while protecting legitimate national security interests. The woman you're investigating is indeed military personnel, and her actions in the alley were consistent with her training and background. Thompson leaned forward, finally hearing the confirmation he had been seeking. Can you tell me her identity and how I can contact her? I'd like to interview her about the incident and get her statement for our case files. Santos consulted the false documentation that had been prepared for Sarah Martinez. The individual in question is Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, currently assigned to Naval Base Kitsap. Her military specialty is military police, and she has received additional training in defensive tactics and hand-to-hand combat. We can arrange for you to interview her under appropriate circumstances. The detective felt a sense of satisfaction at finally receiving concrete information, though he noticed that some details seemed carefully scripted. What was she doing in that alley? And why did the situation escalate to physical confrontation rather than her calling for backup or attempting to de-escalate? Agent Foster, who had been introduced as a Department of Defense liaison, responded to Thompson's question. Petty Officer Martinez was off duty and in civilian clothes at the time of the incident. She was taking a shortcut to her vehicle when she was confronted by the three perpetrators. Her training kicked in when verbal de-escalation failed, and she perceived an imminent physical threat. Thompson made detailed notes, though he was already formulating follow-up questions that might reveal additional information. The explanation was plausible, but something about the precision and effectiveness of the woman's actions still seemed to exceed what he would expect from conventional military police training. As the briefing continued, Thompson began to understand that while he was receiving official cooperation, the information was being carefully controlled and limited. The federal officials were clearly protecting aspects of Sarah Martinez's background and activities that they considered sensitive, but they were providing enough detail to satisfy his immediate investigative needs. The arrangement of an interview with Sarah would be the next critical test of the false identity operation. If she could convincingly portray her fictional background while answering Thompson's questions, the security breach might be successfully contained. However, if inconsistencies emerged or if Thompson's investigation uncovered additional information that contradicted the false narrative, the situation could quickly escalate beyond the intelligence community's ability to control. The interview between Detective Thompson and Sarah Martinez was scheduled to take place at Naval Base Kitsap in a neutral conference room that would provide an appropriate setting for official questioning while maintaining the security protocols required for military installations. Sarah spent the morning reviewing her fabricated background materials and practicing responses to anticipated questions, knowing that a single inconsistency could unravel the entire deception. Agent Foster and Lieutenant Commander Hayes conducted a final preparation session with Sarah, running through potential scenarios and testing her knowledge of the false identity they had created. The fictional background was comprehensive, but required careful attention to detail, as Detective Thompson would likely probe for specific information about her training, assignments, and experience. Remember that Thompson is investigating this as a potential assault case, Agent Foster reminded Sarah. His primary interest is in understanding what happened in that alley and ensuring that justice is served appropriately. However, he's also clearly curious about your background and capabilities, so expect questions that go beyond the immediate incident. Lieutenant Commander Hayes added practical guidance about maintaining her cover. Your fictional military police background includes training at Fort Leonard Wood, assignment to Joint Base Lewis McChord, and deployment to Kandahar as part of a conventional security detail. We've created documentation for all of these assignments, but you need to be prepared for detailed questions about specific locations, procedures, and experiences. Sarah understood the complexity of her situation. She needed to convincingly portray someone with extensive military training while concealing the true nature and extent of her special operations background. The challenge was made more difficult by the fact that her actual combat experience far exceeded what would be typical for the fictional military police career she was supposed to represent. When Detective Thompson arrived at Naval Base Kitsap, he was escorted through security procedures that emphasized the sensitive nature of his visit. The base personnel who guided him through the facility were polite but clearly cautious, reinforcing his impression that Sarah Martinez was connected to activities that extended beyond routine military service. The conference room where the interview would take place was sterile and official, with recording equipment that would capture their conversation for official records. Thompson had prepared extensive notes and questions, though he planned to begin with basic inquiries to establish rapport before moving to more detailed examination of the alley incident. Sarah entered the room in her dress uniform, presenting the professional appearance of a career military police officer. Her bearing was confident and respectful, matching what Thompson would expect from someone with her supposed background and training. She introduced herself formally and expressed willingness to cooperate with his investigation. Petty Officer Martinez, Thompson began, I appreciate you taking time to speak with me about the incident that occurred 3 nights ago in the Morrison district. I understand you were off duty at the time, and found yourself confronted by three individuals who apparently intended to rob or assault you. Sarah nodded, maintaining eye contact and projecting calm professionalism. That's correct, detective. I was walking through the alley as a shortcut to my vehicle when three men approached me in a threatening manner. Initially, I attempted to de-escalate the situation verbally, but when they became physically aggressive, I defended myself using techniques from my military training. Thompson made notes while observing Sarah's demeanor and speech patterns. Her responses seemed natural and unguarded, though he detected an underlying precision in her choice of words that suggested careful consideration of what information to reveal. Can you walk me through exactly what happened, starting from when you first noticed the men? Thompson asked. He was particularly interested in understanding the sequence of events and Sarah's decision-making process throughout the confrontation. Sarah provided a detailed account that aligned closely with what Thompson had observed in the surveillance footage, though her verbal description included nuances and details that hadn't been visible in the grainy video. She explained her assessment of the threat, her attempts at verbal de-escalation, and her decision to use physical force when the situation escalated beyond her ability to control through other means. Your response to the threat was remarkably effective, Thompson observed. Can you tell me about your training background? What prepared you to handle that kind of situation so decisively? This question represented the first major test of Sarah's fictional background. She needed to explain her capabilities while staying within the bounds of her supposed military police career and avoiding any reference to her actual special operations experience. I completed basic military police training at Fort Leonard Wood, which included extensive instruction in hand-to-hand combat, defensive tactics, and threat assessment, Sarah explained. During my deployment to Afghanistan, I received additional training in personal security and close-quarters combat due to the hostile environment we were operating in. I've also pursued martial arts training in my personal time, which has enhanced my defensive capabilities. Thompson found this explanation plausible, though he was curious about specific details. What type of martial arts training have you pursued? And how long have you been studying these disciplines? Sarah had anticipated this line of questioning and was prepared with a detailed response that would satisfy Thompson's curiosity while maintaining her cover. I've been studying Krav Maga for about 8 years, and I also have experience with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and traditional boxing. The combination of military training and civilian martial arts has given me a comprehensive foundation in personal defense techniques. The detective made additional notes, cross-referencing Sarah's explanation with his observations of the surveillance footage. Her claimed background seemed consistent with the level of skill she had demonstrated, though he remained impressed by the precision and control she had shown during the confrontation. The three men you encountered have extensive criminal records and are suspected of similar attacks throughout the Morrison district, Thompson explained. Did you recognize any of them, or have you had any previous contact with individuals involved in criminal activities in that area? Sarah shook her head convincingly. No, detective. I had never seen any of them before that night. I don't spend much time in that particular area of the city, and I certainly don't have any connections to criminal activities or organizations. Her response was truthful, as she had indeed never encountered those specific individuals prior to the alley incident. Thompson continued his questioning, exploring various aspects of Sarah's background and experience. He asked about her current assignment, her plans for future deployment, and her impressions of civilian life during shore leave. Sarah answered each question smoothly, drawing on her fabricated documentation while maintaining the persona of a dedicated but conventional military police officer. However, Thompson's investigative instincts continued to suggest that there were layers to Sarah Martinez that weren't being revealed. Her responses were all plausible and well-supported, but there was something about her composure and the way she carried herself that seemed to exceed what he would expect from someone with her supposed background. Petty Officer Martinez, Thompson said, shifting to a more direct approach, I've been investigating crimes for 15 years, and I've encountered many people with military and martial arts training. What I witnessed in that surveillance footage represents a level of skill and tactical awareness that's quite exceptional. Are you certain you've told me everything about your background that might be relevant to this case? This question represented the most dangerous moment of the interview for Sarah. Thompson was clearly skeptical about the completeness of her explanation, and his experience was telling him that important information was being withheld. She needed to acknowledge his observation while reinforcing her fictional background. "Detective, I understand your surprise about my capabilities," Sarah responded carefully. "The combination of military police training, deployment experience, and years of dedicated martial arts practice has given me skills that might seem unusual for someone my age. However, I can assure you that I've been completely truthful about my background and training." Thompson studied Sarah's expression and body language, looking for any signs of deception or discomfort. While he couldn't detect obvious indicators of dishonesty, his instincts continued to suggest that the full truth was more complex than what he was being told. Agent Foster, who had been monitoring the interview through closed-circuit video, realized that Thompson's skepticism posed a potential threat to the operation. If the detective continued to pursue his suspicions, he might uncover inconsistencies in Sarah's fictional background or discover information that contradicted the false narrative they had created. A decision was made to conclude the interview before Thompson's questions could probe deeper into potentially problematic areas. Special Agent Santos entered the conference room and politely informed Thompson that security protocols required the session to end, as Sarah was needed for classified briefings related to her upcoming deployment. "Detective Thompson," Santos explained, "we appreciate your thorough investigation of this incident, and Petty Officer Martinez has been very cooperative with your inquiries. However, operational requirements dictate that we need to conclude this interview. If you have additional questions, they can be submitted through official channels for review and possible follow-up." Thompson was frustrated by the abrupt ending to his questioning, but he recognized that he was operating within a military environment where his civilian authority was limited. He thanked Sarah for her cooperation and gathered his notes, though he remained convinced that significant aspects of the case were still unexplored. As Thompson prepared to leave Naval Base Kitsap, he was approached by Lieutenant Commander Hayes, who provided additional context about Sarah's fictional background while subtly discouraging further investigation. "Detective, I want to assure you that Petty Officer Martinez is a dedicated and highly trained military professional," Hayes explained. "Her actions in that alley reflect the caliber of personnel we develop through our training programs, and you should feel confident that justice was served when she defended herself against those criminals." Thompson nodded politely, while mentally noting that even this additional explanation seemed carefully crafted to provide information while limiting his ability to pursue deeper investigation. His years of experience had taught him to recognize when official cooperation was being provided within strict boundaries. Following Thompson's departure, the intelligence team conducted a comprehensive assessment of the interview and its potential implications. Sarah's performance had been excellent, and Thompson appeared satisfied with the basic facts of the case. However, his obvious skepticism about the completeness of her background remained a concern. Agent Foster met with Sarah to debrief the interview and discuss next steps. "You handled Thompson's questions very well, but it's clear that he suspects there's more to your background than what we've revealed. We need to be prepared for the possibility that he'll continue investigating through unofficial channels." Sarah understood that the false identity operation had achieved its immediate objective of satisfying Thompson's official inquiry, but the long-term security implications remained uncertain. If Thompson discovered information that contradicted her fictional background, the entire deception could unravel with potentially serious consequences for ongoing operations. Lieutenant Commander Hayes made the decision to accelerate Sarah's deployment schedule, removing her from the immediate area where Thompson's investigation was taking place. While this wouldn't permanently resolve the security concerns, it would create distance between Sarah and any potential follow-up inquiries that might arise. "Your deployment will commence tomorrow morning," Hayes informed Sarah. "This will remove you from Thompson's immediate reach and provide time for any residual interest in this case to fade. However, you should be prepared for the possibility that future assignments may be constrained by the need to maintain consistency with your fictional military police background. Meanwhile, Detective Thompson returned to his office with mixed feelings about the conclusion of his investigation. He had obtained enough information to close the case officially, as the perpetrators had been identified and the victim had provided a statement. However, his investigative instincts continued to suggest that the full truth about Sarah Martinez remained hidden. Thompson decided to conduct additional research into the background information he had received about Sarah, though he recognized that his access to classified military records was extremely limited. He began looking into publicly available information about military police training programs and tried to assess whether the capabilities he had witnessed could realistically result from the training Sarah had described. The detective also reached out to contacts in federal law enforcement who might have experience with cases involving military personnel. While he couldn't share specific details about his investigation due to security classifications, he hoped to gain general insights about the intersection between civilian law enforcement and military operations. Unknown to Thompson, his continued interest in the case was being monitored by intelligence personnel who were prepared to take additional action if his inquiries approached sensitive areas. Agent Foster had implemented surveillance of Thompson's activities to ensure that any developments that might threaten operational security would be detected immediately. As Sarah prepared for her accelerated deployment, she reflected on the complex chain of events that had resulted from a simple act of self-defense in an alley. The incident had demonstrated the challenges faced by special operations personnel when their classified capabilities intersected with civilian situations, and it had required the creation of an entirely new cover identity to protect ongoing missions. The resolution of the immediate security threat had been successful, but Sarah understood that her career would be permanently affected by the need to maintain her fictional background. Future operations would need to account for the limitations imposed by her supposed military police training, and any situations that might reveal her true capabilities would need to be carefully managed to avoid contradicting her established cover story. The case represented a reminder of the constant vigilance required to maintain operational security in an environment where civilian and military worlds frequently intersected. While Detective Thompson's investigation had been contained, the incident highlighted the ongoing challenges faced by intelligence agencies in protecting their personnel while operating within democratic societies that value transparency and accountability. 6 months after the alley incident, Detective Marcus Thompson found himself reviewing a cold case file that had been gathering dust in the Seattle Police Department's archives. The case involved a series of unsolved break-ins at high-security facilities throughout the Pacific Northwest, incidents that had baffled local law enforcement due to the sophisticated nature of the intrusions and the apparent lack of valuable items stolen. Thompson had been assigned to the cold case unit after a departmental reorganization, and his methodical approach to investigation had already yielded results in several previously stagnant cases. However, this particular file caught his attention not because of the crimes themselves, but because of a security consultant's report that mentioned surveillance footage showing an unidentified woman demonstrating exceptional physical capabilities during one of the incidents. The description triggered Thompson's memory of his investigation into the Morrison District alley confrontation. While the cases seemed unrelated on the surface, something about the language used to describe the woman's abilities reminded him of his encounter with Petty Officer Sarah Martinez. He decided to request copies of the surveillance footage to satisfy his curiosity, though he didn't expect to find any actual connection. Meanwhile, Sarah Martinez was completing her second deployment since the alley incident, serving in a classified capacity as part of a joint special operations task force in Eastern Europe. Her official cover as a military police officer had proven more limiting than anticipated, requiring careful coordination to ensure that her actual capabilities weren't revealed during interactions with conventional military personnel. The mission had been successful, involving the rescue of hostages from a terrorist cell that had been operating across multiple international borders. Sarah's combination of linguistic skills technical expertise, and combat training had been essential to the operation's success, though her contributions would never be officially acknowledged due to the classified nature of the work. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes had remained in contact with Sarah throughout her deployment, providing updates on any developments related to the security situation created by Detective Thompson's investigation. The false identity operation had remained stable, with no indications that Thompson had uncovered information that contradicted Sarah's fictional background. However, Hayes was aware that Thompson had been transferred to the cold case unit and was conducting investigations that might eventually intersect with other classified operations. The intelligence community maintained ongoing surveillance of Thompson's activities to ensure that any potential security threats could be addressed proactively. Agent Rebecca Foster had been promoted to a senior position within the Defense Intelligence Agency, where she continued to oversee security matters involving classified personnel operating in civilian environments. Her experience with the Sarah Martinez case had become a template for handling similar situations, and she had developed comprehensive protocols for managing security breaches involving special operations assets. Foster had recently been briefed on Thompson's assignment to the cold case unit and his access to historical surveillance footage from various incidents. While none of these cases directly involved Sarah Martinez, Foster was concerned about the possibility that Thompson might recognize patterns or techniques that could lead him back to questions about Sarah's true background. The surveillance footage that Thompson had requested from the cold case files revealed incidents that had occurred over a 3-year period, involving break-ins at defense contractor facilities, research laboratories, and government offices. In each case, the perpetrator had demonstrated remarkable skill at bypassing sophisticated security systems while leaving minimal traces of their presence. What made the cases particularly intriguing to Thompson was not just the technical expertise required for the break-ins, but the physical capabilities demonstrated by the unknown perpetrator. Security cameras had captured glimpses of someone moving through facilities with fluid grace and apparent combat training, though the footage was never clear enough to provide positive identification. Thompson began analyzing the footage systematically, looking for patterns in technique and behavior that might provide clues to the perpetrator's identity or background. He was particularly interested in movement patterns and physical capabilities, as these were often more distinctive than appearance characteristics that could be altered through disguise. As Thompson studied the footage more carefully, he began to notice similarities between the movement patterns of the unknown perpetrator and what he remembered from his encounter with Sarah Martinez. Both individuals demonstrated exceptional body control, tactical awareness, and the ability to move efficiently through challenging environments. The similarities were subtle and could easily be attributed to coincidence, but Thompson's investigative instincts suggested a potential connection worth exploring. He began researching Sarah Martinez's deployment schedule to determine whether her presence in the Pacific Northwest during the time period of the break-ins was possible. Thompson's research quickly ran into the same classification barriers he had encountered during his original investigation. Official military records showed Sarah's assignments in general terms, but specific dates and locations were protected by security protocols that prevented civilian access. However, the detective had developed unofficial sources of information during his years in law enforcement. One of Thompson's contacts in federal law enforcement mentioned that several of the break-in incidents had resulted in the theft of classified documents rather than valuable equipment or materials. This detail had been withheld from local law enforcement reports, but it suggested that the perpetrator was interested in intelligence gathering rather than conventional criminal activity. The possibility that the break-ins were connected to espionage or intelligence operations added a new dimension to Thompson's investigation. If Sarah Martinez was indeed connected to these incidents, it would suggest that her background was far more complex than the military police career she had claimed during their interview. Agent Foster became aware of Thompson's new investigation through the surveillance protocols that had been established to monitor his activities. The detective's interest in cases that potentially involved classified operations represented exactly the type of security threat that the intelligence community had been prepared to address. Foster immediately contacted Lieutenant Commander Hayes to discuss the implications of Thompson's investigation and the potential need for additional security measures. If Thompson continued pursuing connections between Sarah Martinez and the classified break-in incidents, more aggressive intervention might be necessary to protect operational security. Thompson's investigation is approaching areas that could compromise multiple ongoing operations, Foster explained during a secure conference call. His access to historical surveillance footage gives him information that wasn't available during our original containment operation, and his investigative skills are allowing him to identify patterns that we didn't anticipate. Hayes understood the seriousness of the situation. What options do we have for addressing this new threat without creating additional security concerns? Thompson has already demonstrated that he's not easily discouraged by bureaucratic obstacles, and more aggressive intervention could attract unwanted attention to our activities. The intelligence team began developing contingency plans for various scenarios, ranging from additional disinformation operations to more direct intervention that would permanently end Thompson's investigation. However, each option carried significant risks and potential consequences that needed to be carefully evaluated. Sarah, who was still deployed in Eastern Europe, was briefed on the developing situation during a secure communication session. Learning that her past actions might be compromising other operations was deeply troubling, as it violated the fundamental principle that special operations personnel should never endanger their colleagues or missions. "I understand the seriousness of the situation," Sarah responded during the briefing. "What can I do to help resolve this without compromising ongoing operations or creating additional security risks?" She was prepared to accept personal consequences if necessary to protect the broader mission and her teammates. Lieutenant Commander Hayes considered various options for using Sarah's cooperation to address the Thompson situation. "We're evaluating several approaches, but we may need you to return from deployment early to participate in additional deception operations. Your direct involvement might be necessary to convince Thompson that his suspicions are unfounded." However, before any decisions could be made about Sarah's involvement, Thompson's investigation took an unexpected turn that changed the entire dynamic of the situation. While reviewing additional surveillance footage from the cold case files, Thompson discovered evidence that suggested the break-in incidents were part of a larger pattern of intelligence gathering that extended far beyond the Pacific Northwest. The scope and sophistication of the operation indicated involvement by foreign intelligence agencies or organized criminal networks with resources that exceeded anything available to individual operators. Thompson began to suspect that he had stumbled onto something much larger than a series of local break-ins, possibly involving international espionage or terrorism. Thompson's realization that his investigation might involve national security threats prompted him to contact federal authorities directly rather than continuing to pursue the matter through local law enforcement channels. He reached out to FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, who had been his primary contact during the original Sarah Martinez investigation. "Agent Santos," Thompson explained during their phone conversation, "I've been reviewing some cold case files, and I've discovered what appears to be a pattern of sophisticated break-ins that might be connected to espionage activities. I think this needs federal attention, and I'm hoping you can help me determine the appropriate next steps." Santos immediately recognized the potential implications of Thompson's discovery and arranged for an emergency briefing to assess the situation. If Thompson had indeed uncovered evidence of foreign intelligence operations, it would require immediate attention from multiple agencies and might actually provide an opportunity to resolve the security concerns related to Sarah Martinez. The federal briefing revealed that Thompson had inadvertently discovered evidence related to a long-running counterintelligence operation that had been tracking foreign agents operating within the United States. The break-in incidents were part of a broader pattern of intelligence gathering that had been under federal surveillance for several years. Rather than being the work of unknown criminals, the incidents represented documented activities by hostile foreign intelligence services that were attempting to steal classified information from defense contractors and research facilities. The surveillance footage Thompson had been analyzing actually showed foreign agents rather than domestic personnel. Agent Foster realized that this development provided an unexpected opportunity to permanently resolve the security concerns related to Sarah Martinez. If Thompson could be convinced that his original suspicions about Sarah were misguided and that the similarities he had noticed were coincidental, the threat to operational security could be eliminated. Detective Thompson, Agent Foster explained during the federal briefing, "Your investigation has provided valuable assistance to an ongoing counterintelligence operation. The individuals captured in the surveillance footage are foreign agents who have been under federal surveillance. Any similarities you may have noticed to the woman involved in your Morrison District case are purely coincidental." Thompson felt a mixture of satisfaction and disappointment as he learned the truth about his investigation. While he was gratified to have contributed to a significant national security operation, he remained somewhat skeptical about the explanation regarding Sarah Martinez. However, the scale and complexity of the foreign intelligence operation provided a plausible explanation for the patterns he had observed. The resolution of Thompson's investigation allowed the intelligence community to close the security file related to Sarah Martinez without requiring additional deception operations or direct intervention. Thompson's skills as an investigator had actually contributed to national security by uncovering important information about foreign intelligence activities. Sarah was able to complete her deployment without the distraction of ongoing security concerns, and her fictional background as a military police officer remained intact. However, the experience had demonstrated the ongoing challenges faced by special operations personnel when their classified capabilities intersected with civilian law enforcement activities. Lieutenant Commander Hayes used the incident as a case study for improving security protocols and training programs for classified personnel. The experience highlighted the importance of considering long-term consequences when special operations assets were required to operate in civilian environments, and it led to enhanced procedures for managing potential security breaches. Agent Foster incorporated the lessons learned from both the original Alley incident and Thompson's subsequent investigation into official training materials for intelligence personnel. The case became a template for understanding how civilian law enforcement investigations could inadvertently threaten operational security, and how such threats could be managed through careful coordination and strategic deception. Detective Thompson returned to his cold case investigations with a new appreciation for the complexity of the security environment in which he operated. While he never learned the full truth about Sarah Martinez, his experience had given him insights into the intersection between civilian law enforcement and national security operations that would influence his approach to future investigations. The Alley incident that had begun as a simple act of self-defense had ultimately contributed to a broader understanding of security challenges and had resulted in the development of improved protocols for protecting classified personnel. While Sarah Martinez would continue her career under the constraints of her fictional background, she had also contributed to the safety and security of future special operations personnel who might find themselves in similar situations. The stories serve as a reminder that in the modern world, the boundaries between civilian and military life were often blurred, and that individual actions could have far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond their immediate circumstances. For Sarah Martinez, a moment of violence in a Seattle alley had permanently changed her career trajectory, but it had also contributed to the development of better security practices that would protect other classified personnel in the future.